I have absolutely no business attempting to fit this vintage 1950s blouse pattern on this 1 yard of fabric, but I'm doing it anyway. So let's find out if I can make it work. So I have this 1950s blouse pattern, Simplicity 1727, and it has 4 amazing views on it. I actually mentioned this pattern and this fabric in my sewing vlog video last fall, and look at me now, actually doing something about it. Now I want to sew view 3, which has this over-bloused style and a drawstring waist and 3/4 length cut-on sleeves. But I have exactly 1 yard of this leaf print cotton lawn from Spoonflower, and that's it. It's absolutely enough fabric for a sleeveless shirt or maybe even short sleeves. Absolutely not enough fabric for much more than that. And yet somehow here I am with 3/4 length cut-on sleeves and even needing to make a drawstring for the waist and still somehow believing I can make this all fit. I originally thought I would do view 4 or just sort of a combination of view 3 without the stand-up collar but with the short sleeves, but I wanted to see how far I could push things because why make it easy on myself? And I do love to skimp on yardage when I can, so here we are. I did do a little bit of playing around first to see if I could make the pattern pieces fit, and well, it's going to be a nail biter for sure. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to make this all fit. Probably, maybe, hopefully, let's figure it out. Okay, so we are at the cutting table, and this is my 1 yard of fabric. This is a digitally printed fabric from Spoonflower. So these are the selvages at these 2 ends, and here's my 1 yard. It is a rather wide fabric. I think it's about 56 inches or so. I definitely would not be able to make this work with something narrower, and hopefully I can make it work with this. But one of the benefits from tracing is that I can use both my traced pattern pieces and the originals. Now, I'm not going to use the originals to cut out, but I can use them as stand-ins to lay everything out on this fabric. And this is something that I highly recommend trying if you are really short on yardage, but you really want to try and make something fit, like I'm doing here. I've done this for kind of complicated prints when sewing pants. I've actually traced out 2 versions of both the back and the front leg so I can lay out all the pattern pieces at a time. Or if you've got like really precious fabric and you're just really unsure if you can make it work, this is a great way to kind of figure that out as you go. So we're gonna do this together, and here's what I think is gonna work here. Now I am gonna do something a little tricky because I did pre-assess this print, and it's a leaf print and it is technically directional. The lighter green squares, the leaves run this way, and the sort of darker blue ones run up. So I've got some running down, some running up, and I cannot fit all of these pattern pieces facing the same direction. So I'm actually going to run the print opposite for the back because it won't matter at all. I mean, it's gonna join up on the over sleeve seam, but who cares? Like, you're not gonna notice. I've done this before. I don't even remember what project I did it on because probably after I sewed it, I never thought about it again. So obviously you wouldn't want to do this for, you know, directional prints that are very specifically laid out in one way. But for this kind of a smaller directional print, no problem. So I've got my front up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my front of my original piece. Now I do need to fold this up because I had to lay this out on, I had to cut this out on the shorter cutting line. So these lines are not going to actually match up exactly here. What's the cutting line here? Okay, yeah, there we go. So yeah, I'm doing this real time, so pardon me while I fuss as I talk. But this is approximately what I could do to fit the front piece. Now here's our back piece. And I'll do the same thing, fold this up on the cutting line. And like I said, this doesn't have to be exact because I'm just kind of doing this to lay this out and make sure that this actually will work. And I'm gonna need to put this one, I think, over here. And if this bodice was any shorter, or if I had like 1.25 yards, I could definitely run it in the same direction, but you can see even if I slide this up very towards the tippy top, I just cannot fit the cut on sleeve and the length here. So that's why I am reversing these. So I've got this one facing this way. Oh, I gotta fold the sleeve out. Don't forget about the sleeves. Got this one facing this way. I am, it being me, I'm gonna try to also match the print on the center back seam. You will be getting a tutorial from me soon on that. If I don't match it on this, I'm not gonna worry about it, because if I can actually make this work on this short amount of fabric, I will be thrilled. But it is looking pretty decent here. I have my front piece. I'm just mirroring this so it'd be as if I was cutting this on the fold. I have my back piece facing opposite directions. Obviously, you want to make sure you don't accidentally have them in facing the same way so you don't cut two lefts or two rights. And I have my facing pieces here. I can just squeeze them in anywhere, or frankly cut them out in something else. It doesn't matter. So if I can't fit the facing pieces, I never worry about that. But the other thing I have is a drawstring. Now, this pattern does not actually have a drawstring pattern piece. I borrowed this from this 50s pattern for a hooded blouse with a drawstring waist that I made before, and I just wanted to see basically so I could figure out if this would fit. For the pattern that I made previously, the drawstring goes on the straight grain. Now I'm supposed to cut out the drawstring for this blouse on the bias grain. I'm not really sure yet which I'm gonna do. This is the one part that I have not thought out fully, but I at least thought that this would be helpful to see how I could maybe fit this either on the bias or on the straighter grain. And what I've done here is I've actually folded this pattern piece in half because I wanted to see if I could fit it on the finished size, including a smaller seam allowance. So the actual seam allowance for this is 5/8 of an inch. And there's no reason for it to be 5/8 of an inch. I'm trying to squeeze this on a tiny amount of fabric. I'm gonna go for 1/4 inch. So for the finished waistband width that I would like, which I think I decided on is a 1/2 inch, then a 1/2 inch for 2 seam allowances, and I'll sew along the long end and the short ends. And so ultimately that was actually the same width as half of this pattern piece. So this is just kind of coincidental. I would be out here with a ruler if I didn't have this pattern piece. So I can definitely see, really, whether I run this on the straight grain, geez, I could almost fit it right along there, but whether I run this on the straight grain or on the bias, I have plenty to fit this if I piece this, which my pattern actually tells me I can do, because if you think about it, this is a drawstring and it's only gonna come out at the side hip. And so it doesn't matter if there's any seams on the inside of the garment. I mean, there could be 5 seams in this, who cares? So long as the ends don't have any seams, although, I mean, quite frankly, even if the ends had seams, who cares? No one's gonna really notice. But I probably only need to put maybe 1 seam in this, I think, to make this work. And that is completely fine. So I think that that means I have enough fabric to make this work. I'm just talking slowly so I can think this through in real time and think about, am I missing anything here? And I think I have enough fabric here. I can't think of anything that I am missing. All I have is my facing pieces. So that's It looks like, frankly, there's plenty of room to put those in here. These are actually cut on the fold, so if I need to seam them, I can, but I can probably fit both of them. I might be able to fit both of them over here on the fold. Maybe not the back. The back facing is on the fold, but if I have to add a seam in like the back bodice piece, I can do that, no problem. And I think I have accounted for everything. Boy, though, I want to look at this pattern and make certain that I'm not missing anything, and I'm really not. This is a very simple pattern. There's really just the blouse and sleeve front. Technically, that's how it refers to it, the blouse and sleeve front, and the blouse and sleeve back, and the back neck facing, and the front neck facing, and our drawstring helpfully borrowed from another pattern. And that is it, because I'm not doing the collar views, which are a couple of the other different pattern views. And so I think I'm good to cut out. So this is how I plot things out when I am very short on yardage and very stubborn and want to try and fit something that probably rightfully would not fit unless you cut it out in the fussiest way possible. So I am going to start cutting this out. And success! I feel very pleased that this is going to work. I say that now, I haven't actually cut it out yet. It always feels like a little dicey of a prospect to say something's going to work until you've cut the fabric out. So let's cut out and see. I forgot to mention when I walked through how I would lay things out that sometimes if I'm in a hurry, or you could just do this if you didn't have traced pieces to lay out double pattern pieces with the originals, is just to use pins to mark the corners where you think you're going to place the pattern piece before cutting, before flipping it over to another spot. It does feel a little less certain though that way, so in a case like this where I was really short on yardage, plus using a pricey fabric, even at a sale price a few months ago, I definitely prefer being able to see it all laid out in front of me to be sure I could actually fit all the pieces I needed before I started cutting into the fabric. I managed in the end to fit both the back and front neckline facings on the fold without piecing either of them, and I decided for the drawstring that I would run it on the bias like the pattern recommended. So I just cut out 4 sections for that, and I'll seam them together when I sew things up. And here we go. This is all I have left over. I managed to fit all of my pattern pieces on 1 yard of fabric, even though my pattern said that I needed at least 1.25 yards for this width of fabric. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. So let's make this blouse. So I first pinned my bust darts and started to pin the elbow darts, but then remembered that pinning all those tiny little darts is for the birds. They're so close you can't possibly pin them all, and there's 3 at each elbow. So I just lined them up at the sewing machine. I'm using a Microtex needle, by the way, which is sharper since I tested first, and this cotton lawn fabric is really crisp to sew through, and it shows pinholes easily. I sewed the center back seam first so that I could stay stitch the neckline. I didn't get the print matched up 100% at the center back seam, in large part because when I was cutting out my second back piece, I forgot to cut the center back seam, and I moved the fabric when I tried to pull it away, so I think I messed it up a little bit, but it came out pretty good anyway. So here I was about to talk about stay stitching the back and front neckline seams when I thought I discovered a problem, which turns out not to be a problem, but then in the process, I discovered a problem that turned out to actually be a problem. So I was looking at my pattern piece and I thought it seemed really strange that the drawing showed the back piece without a seam. And I suddenly thought, uh-oh, did I mess up? Was I supposed to not have a center back seam and cut the back piece on the fold for this view? But no, that's absolutely correct how I did it. It's supposed to have a center back seam, and in fact, you can see the center back seam on all the views. So it's actually really strange. I think it's, I guess, kind of a mistake that the original pattern doesn't show a seam here, because it does show it for view 1 and view 2. It shows a center back seam. So anyway, that turned out to not be an issue. But in the process of investigating this, what I did discover is that I made a big error that I'm gonna have to dig my way out of. So I know better than to do this, but when I cut out the back piece, I accidentally cut the neckline on the seam line for my view and not the cutting line, which means I left myself no seam allowance for the back piece only. So that means my back neckline facing obviously is not big enough. And I've been thinking about what I can do to fix this, and obviously cutting another set of back pieces out is not in the cards since I've used up all my fabric. But what I think I can do and end up with something pretty similar to the original is cut that same seam allowance off of the front and then off of the front neckline facing. I've already marked them in preparation for doing this. And then when I sew the neckline seam front and back, I will use a really narrow seam allowance. So instead of using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch. I will go down to an 1/8 of an inch if I can. I'm not really sure if I can do that with this fabric. I will test that out first. But what that means is I should theoretically end up with a neckline that is only maybe a 1/4 of an inch max lower than the original. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. That is far better than just having to chuck all of this and say, oh well, no blouse for me. So I'm annoyed that I made this mistake, but I think that I can rectify this situation and still save this blouse. Whew. After sorting out trimming all those neckline edges to even them out, I sewed those shoulder seams, and I also stitched together the sections of the bias strips to make the drawstring. It's just like making bias tape basically, and makes a nice long strip out of a bunch of shorter ones. I don't really know what's going on. I seem to be making all sorts of stupid mistakes. I cut my bias strips for the drawstring at 1 inch, even though I wanted this to be a 1/2 inch wide. So again, giving myself no seam allowance. So I had previously thought that this would be fine at 3/8 of an inch wide. So I guess I'm going to attempt to sew this with a 1/8 inch seam allowance and see if that works. And thankfully the answer is it did work. This is admittedly an eyeballed 1/8 of an inch, but this is good enough for me and means I won't need to cut out a bunch more strips and piece those together too. Well, what sewing my drawstring taught me is that I should be fine to use about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for my neckline. And I have my oversleeve seams sewed, and I'll talk about that in a second. And I now have my cut back and front neckline facing attached to the bodice, and it all fits. So that's really what I need to see to know that I am on track. And then let me show you what I did for the oversleeve seam. I feel like I'm probably going to want to take these sleeves in a little bit. I'm not sure yet though, so I'm going to need to try it on, but I can't do that until I have my side seams sewed. But in order to do the neckline, I had to have this sleeve seam finished at the shoulder edge, but I didn't really want to finish it all the way the length of the sleeve because I may take this in. So I just used my serger and trimmed just, I don't know, a few inches, and once I'm able to try this on, I will continue this, or if I've taken this in, then, you know, finish that seam allowance depending on where I land with that. So that's what I did to handle that. And I'm going to go and now sew these side seams, and I should be well on my way to getting this blouse done. Finally, I don't know, I keep making all these stupid mistakes. Hopefully there won't be any more. Am I on track now? God, I hope so. I sewed the neckline with that narrow little seam allowance next, although I erred probably closer to a 1/4 of an inch than an 1/8 of an inch, because I didn't think I'd catch the facing all the way around with my understitching otherwise. And I also turned my drawstring inside out with my tube turner. So I just sewed my neckline seam, and I had to remove the stay stitching because the back neckline was too low. So obviously the stay stitching was going to be in the actual body of the blouse. So I removed that, and this is a tip for if you have pinholes. Like this fabric shows pinholes like crazy. So you just need an eraser, and on the wrong side of the fabric, you basically just erase, 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 erase. It takes a while. I kind of go in like little circles, and you can see I've done it on the right side, and it's not perfect yet, but it's so much better than on the left side where I haven't done it yet. So just a little tip in case you have to get pinholes out of your fabric. Okay, so here's where I'm at. I have my drawstring completed, and I have a pin at one end because I might change the length when I get this all assembled, and I have my neckline completed. I was able to catch my facing with the understitching, which is great. And with my little bit of cutting and trimming trickery, I think that this neckline is only going to be about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch lower than originally intended. So thankfully I was able to dig myself out of that hole. And I still have a little bit of the pinholes showing, but I will probably work on that one more time, and then the rest of that will come out in the first time I launder this. And so next I'm going to sew the side seams, and since these are cut-on sleeves, that will be this whole seam here. And then I'm going to try it on and see if I want to make any alterations to the width of the sleeve, or really anything else, although the body matches up pretty much exactly with another drawstring blouse that I made in the past, very different style. So I think I'll be happy with that, but remains to be seen about the sleeves, and I will go do that now. Okay, does anybody else, when they're looking for scissors or thread snips in their sewing room, go like this while they're looking, as if somehow that's going to magically turn them up? So I sewed the undersleeve side seams, and then because I wanted to do the hem first before I assessed the sleeves, and the hem forms the casing for the drawstring, I also pressed up the hem seam allowances too, in preparation for adding the hole for the drawstring. So here's what I'm doing for the eyelet that is meant to be used for the drawstring hole for the casing for the drawstring, which is at the hem. Now I folded up my 7/8 and then 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I have it just opened here so I can take a look at this. And this is approximately where this eyelet would go. Now I'm just going to use a buttonhole. That is what I did for this other 50s blouse that I made in the past. That will be perfectly fine. I'll just do a small little buttonhole to thread my drawstring through. But the pattern art makes it look, the pattern art makes it look like the bow is more towards the side seam. And I guess maybe that's because this is a gathered waistline. So even though it's a few inches from the side seam, which is here, that probably means when it's gathered in, it'll be closer to the side seam. So I think I'm going to trust in the pattern and make the buttonhole where it tells me to, and I think that that will hopefully I'll be happy with that location because it's sort of a one-shot deal. So when it's done, it's done. That's where it's going to be. And here's actually what it shows you to do to make a little eyelet by hand. And I have done a hand-worked eyelet like this before, but I'm just going to do a buttonhole on the machine because you're not going to really see it because it's going to be hidden by the bow. Okay, so my hem and the casing for my drawstring is done. My buttonhole is right here. And I did actually decide to add a piece of interfacing behind it because I thought it would help support the buttonhole. And I am ready to try this on. What I did is I took one clip into the seam allowance because it's really hard to try a cut-on sleeve before you trim down and grade and clip the seam allowance because it's all that fabric will bunch up under the arm. So I just gave it like one little clip because I know I'm not going to need to let this out. If anything, I might be taking this in a little bit. So I'll try it on to decide if I'm happy with the width of the sleeve, and then I can finish the sleeve hems, which I have already pre-pressed so that I can fold this up. You're supposed to finish this with bias tape. I am not going to fuss around with that. But before I thread my drawstring, I'm actually going to try it on as is because I don't know, I have this suspicion that this could also be a really cute top just like this without the drawstring. So I'm going to try it on like this. Obviously not for this version, it wouldn't be, but I want to see what it looks like without the drawstring because maybe I'd like to use this pattern for just a straight sided top without the drawstring gathering. I might like to do that sometime. So I'll try it on, see what I think about the sleeves, see what I think about a future version of this blouse without the drawstring, and then I will thread the casing and deal with whatever I need to for the sleeves, hem the sleeves, and then all that's left is just tacking down my facings and I'll be done. Okay, moment of truth for these sleeves. Quite frankly, I'm perfectly happy with how these sleeves fit. In this cotton lawn fabric, even though it's a little bit stiff, they're great. They fit me just fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish those seam allowances and then hem these sleeves, and I'm pretty much done. I just have to thread the drawstring into the casing. I did also want to assess this to see if I might like to make a future version that didn't have a drawstring and just wear it kind of cropped boxy style. And I think this is a great length for that. I like this quite a bit. I think the fit is good. So I could definitely see getting sort of a fifth view out of this pattern. And I love having a pattern that I can make multiples of in different kind of styles and tweaks. So very happy about that. The only other thing is this neckline is exceptionally high, which is kind of ironic given all the problems that I had with accidentally cutting off the seam allowances and trying to make up for that. I could stand for this to be probably a good 1/4 of an inch lower. I love a high slash neck and boat neck, but in this kind of stiffer fabric, I think that might end up being slightly uncomfortable over time. But I am quite happy with this, having never sewed this pattern before, so I'm gonna finish it up and I will have myself a blouse soon. And so I just needed that last little bit of finishing work on this blouse to call it complete. I'm so happy with how this blouse turned out, and that I squeezed it out of a yard of fabric and worked around a couple of pretty big mistakes in the process. Does it qualify as winter appropriate in cotton lawn? No. But hey, I vowed in the fall to sew more tops for myself, so I can at least check one off the list, and I can pretend spring is right around the corner, can't I? Plus, I love adding another new-to-me vintage pattern into my rotation of patterns that I like and want to revisit on future versions. Check out one of these 2 videos if you like following along sewing projects, and I'll see you again soon with more vintage sewing adventures.